Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Adriana woke up, lost her eyes with her hand. What a horror. I fell asleep right over the last lines of the novel. She threw herself on the table beneath the light baby steps, scrambled lightly up the attics. The stairs came in. Good morning, my joy. Adriana involuntarily admired her daughter, her smooth girlish skin of golden drama. What morning is it? The girl waved her hand carelessly. It's already evening. By the way, Grandma came and was very offended that you didn't meet her. Yes. Adriana curled her lips. When she's going back, I'll be sure to see her off. And through the laughter. How contradictory are you adults? You teach us to control ourselves, and you don't hold back at all. You're so smart. Adriana pressed the print button, and the pages popped into the printer tray one after another. She stood up from the table and laughed lightly. You'd better make me a strong cup of coffee and I'll be in touch. Adriana headed towards the bathroom. What coffee is in there? Betty was indignant. Do you need a solid dinner? As I recall, you haven't eaten anything since last night. Adriana turned to her daughter and smiled. I won't say no. Then hurry up. Come on down. I've heated everything up, golden child. Adriana thought, turning on the water and closing the door behind her. The weather in Marseille had been beautiful all month. Adriana had a new contract with a publisher, and the novel had a large print run. She rested most of her time, spending it with her daughter. Betty inherited her mother-in-law's looks and her mother's temperament, and no amount of education could curb it. In this regard, Adriana's relationship with her mother-in-law was difficult. She demanded from her some kind of extra care for her son. She imposed her way of life in the house, constantly accounted for excessive displays of affection. Adriana had long ago managed to disappear from that black English family, to go to her parents' small house in Marseille. She wanted to live not according to a schedule, but according to her mood and desire to write at night and sleep until dinner. She had managed to do that before her mother-in-law arrived. But nothing. She would soon be on her way back to England. Adriana could not wait for that moment. Soon, however, an event occurred that changed their relationship with each other. A scarlet dawn was breaking over Marseille. The sultry night was behind them. Adriana had spent it with friends, celebrating the release of her book. They left the bar, and a cab pulled up a few minutes later. Adriana said goodbye to her friends because she decided to walk a little and get some fresh air. She walked along the sidewalk and smiled. Lately, she had been lucky in almost everything, except for the arrival of her mother-in-law. Suddenly, she heard a low moaning sound off to the side. The girl turned around at it and saw a man lying on a cardboard box. People passing by paid no attention to him. Adriana walked over to him. He was unconscious. She put her hand on his wrist. His pulse was weak and sparse. The girl immediately called an ambulance. 10 minutes later, the paramedics loaded the stranger into the car. What's wrong with him? Asked Adriana to one of the doctors. It's hard to say, he replied. We'll need to examine him. I need to write down your details for the report. The young woman dictated everything the doctor was interested in. When the ambulance left, she sighed heavily and went home. In the early sunny morning, Adriana was awakened by a phone call. She jumped out of bed and pressed the receiver to her ear. Hello. This is Adriana Morel. Yes, sorry to call you in advance, but it's necessary. This is Rick Kendall calling for you. I represent Mr. Lawman, owner of a chain of shipbuilding firms in the Crimea. Does that mean anything to you? Absolutely nothing, Adriana replied. You're currently hosting Kathy Hogarth. Yes, that's my mother-in-law. We've asked her to arrive at the harbor at 11 o'clock this afternoon. For what purpose? The solicitor took a long time to explain the details to Adriana. She listened with her eyes widening with surprise. We will arrive. She fumbled confusedly for the telephone receiver to hang up. Finally, she managed to do so. It can't be. It just can't be. Rick Kendall met them at the harbor entrance and led them to the dock. A graceful sailing vessel rocked smoothly in front of them. It was called the Cathy. A tan brunette lowered a gangplank for them. They stepped into the deckhouse. "You're the Cathy." And once again, the solicitor clarified. "Yes, I am. This is my daughter-in-law Adriana and granddaughter Betty." The woman pointed at them with her hand. "Pleased to meet you," he grinned. "May I see your passport?" "Just a moment." The woman took a document out of her purse and held it out to him. Kendall sat down at the table, entered the data into the contract, and handed the passport back. "You didn't tell her anything." The attorney turned to Adriana. She waved her head in the negative. "Well, I represent Benjamin Lawman." The woman shuddered and dropped her bag. Betty bent down and picked it up. "Mr. Lawman is giving you this vessel. Please sign some papers." He led Cathy over to the table. When the formalities were over, the attorney briefly outlined the specifications of the vessel, handed the woman a white gift envelope, and stepped ashore. Cathy quickly slipped the envelope into her breast pocket and smiled awkwardly. "Where is the master himself?" "He doesn't want to see me," she shouted after Cathy. "Unfortunately, Mr. Lawman is ill and undergoing treatment. It's only by luck that he's alive. So have a safe trip." The man said goodbye. "So what's next?" Cathy asked. "What about what?" I was surprised. "Let's go upstairs and look at the present." On the deck, a handsome young man approached them. "My name is Ethan Jenkins." He introduced himself. "Mr. Lawman asked me to take you for a ride along the coast of Marseilles. So me and 2 sailors are at your complete disposal. Or do you prefer the open sea?" Of course, in the open, Ariza clapped her hands and turned to her grandmother. "Do you mind?" "Oh, really?" Tears glistened in Cathy's eyes. "Well, the provisions have been delivered to the ship. There's seating aft, 3 comfortable cabins below. Let's go." Adriana nodded to the boy with a smile. He looked at her admiringly and went downstairs. Betty followed him. The 2 women were left alone. Adriana looked at Cathy questioningly. "I'd like to explain everything to you, but I can't find the words," she said. "I don't think that's necessary." Adriana laughed. She took her novel out of her large sports bag and handed it to her mother-in-law. Soon the yacht was out on the open sea. The engine smogged. The sailors pulled up the sails, and Betty brought Adriana a warm plaid. She spread it out on the deck. She sat with her arms around her knees and listened with pleasure to the music of the waves. There was quite a bit of Ethan in the deckhouse. "You promised you'd let me stand at the helm." "Well, give it a try." Ethan stepped aside. Betty put her hands on the helm. "Wow, that's great. You speak Russian really well." "It's the steering of the boat that needs some practice." Ethan put his hands on top of the helm. "So my grandmother's been speaking Russian to me since I was a kid. So it's no problem. I also speak French and English easily. You don't suffer from modesty, do you?" Ethan grinned. A 15-year-old captain, and through the shouting she was only 13. Strange story, though. She cocked her head, trying to convince Ethan. "Just some mysterious Mr. X, this Mr. Lawman. Where did he come from, and what's his connection to my grandmother? I've known Benjamin for a while, and not much else. He and my father were friends once, and then they didn't speak for a long time. He helped us a lot. We had some hard times in our family. Thanks to him, I got interested in backed-in sports too. Now I often go to his house. He's a very hospitable host, but he's secretive and stingy with his emotions. Your grandmother was in the same class as my father." "Wow." And through the release of his hand sought a chair behind Ethan's back. "Look, there was a love story there. I can feel it. I'm gonna go take a look at my ladies. Maybe something once. By the way, ask them. We'll spend the night at sea. It's humbling if we do. There are groceries on campus. I'd like something to eat." "Yeah, I'll ask." Betty hurried to the deck. It was empty. The girl went downstairs to the cabins. The door of one of them was open. Betty heard muffled voices. "How did you know all this?" asked Cathy. "It's just a fantasy. she replied. Yes, but you told me a little bit about your past. You named them. But you didn't know the essence. Call it subtle intuition if you want. It's incredible. You captured my feelings very accurately. I'm a woman, and I can love too, even if you doubt it. Forgive me. I've been too selfish, too withdrawn, too trusting. And today I not only took a little sea voyage, but thanks to one of your stories, I plunged into the abyss of the past. You know, I want this boat to be yours. Yours and Betty's. It's worth over $3 million in rubles. You made me happy today, and I want to repay you and make you a millionaire. Let me make it up to you. There was a quiet, sobbing sound. Apple took a step back, and her foot caught on the plate left on the floor. She picked it up. Inside was an open book with a note lying in it. Kathy walked out of the cabin, slamming the book Betty managed to read from the sheet. Forgive me, Benjamin. She held out her grandmother's novel. On the cover was a picture of a sailing ship against a seascape, and printed in brightly colored lettering, the title is stronger than all victories. Farewell. Benjamin Lawman and Michael Jenkins had been friends since childhood. Benjamin no longer remembered how they met. In one of the time-blurred early memories of their strongest summers together, swinging on a wooden swing in the shade of tall poplars. But was it reality or a play of the imagination? Benjamin could not say with certainty. They went to the same kindergarten, studied in the same class, lived in the same stairwell. Benjamin's mother was a good fish cook on Thursdays too. Both families had dinner at White's without fail. In turn, Michael's mother would invite the neighbors over for her famous 12-layer honey cake, and everything on Sunday was filled with the smells of honey and strong over emergency Indian tea. Lawman and Jenkins, I'm telling you again, if you don't stop whispering immediately, I will tell you. I urge you to concentrate. Final exams are coming up. Christina, the physics teacher, adjusted her glasses from the floor of her neck to the tip of her nose and continued to explain the new topic. The door opened into the classroom, and slowly the breasts, and then the size of the body of the headmaster surfaced. Excuse us a moment, Christina. She walked to the back of the room. You have a new addition to your regiment. Meet Kathy. She turned to the students and pointed to a tall, white-skinned girl who entered with her hair carelessly golden at the back of her head. Please love and pity her. She will be studying with you from today. The new girl said hello, looked around at her classmates carefully, and walked to a vacant back desk. Very nice. Michael winked at his friend. Benjamin shrugged indifferently. It was 1991. A May thunderstorm was blowing outside the window. Benjamin had brought back another medal from the swimming competition, right on the eve of his majority. The Lawman family was getting ready to celebrate. A statuesque blonde woman was setting the table in the kitchen. A handsome man with a somewhat sly expression watched the goose cooking. He carefully opened the cupboard door, once again filled his glass with Wermec, and sat down at the kitchen table, happily holding out the amber drink. Benjamin emerged from his bedroom, strode into the hall. Christina stopped arranging the dishes on the table and looked thoughtfully at her son. Her memory took her back to the summer of 1980. Benjamin had fallen gravely ill then. The disease gave complications, so the boy went to first grade only the next year at the age of 8. Christina slowly sat down on a stool. Tears came to her eyes. Benjamin, have you grown up? Finished school and in the army. Quietly washed up. She knew the sobs and the sobs. Mom, stop being so damp. Benjamin hugged his mother and gently wiped her wet cheeks. The bell rang. Christina immediately lit up, stood in the front doorway, and Michael's glowing face appeared. He walked in and appraisingly looked at his friend. Well, you've made your point. He commented on Benjamin's strict new suit. Benjamin put his index finger to his lips. Now the parents will be gone. I've changed the present. He explained. I don't want to offend. Michael nodded understandingly. How is the goose? Christina shouted in the direction of the kitchen. When William heard his wife's voice, He rummaged around the kitchen with an unacceptable glass in his hand. Finally, he set it down behind a flower pot on the windowsill and walked into the hall. Christina looked up at him. Yes, she stretched out. The goose is ready. William lowered his eyes and shivered, letting his wife into the kitchen. She opened the oven, pulled out a baking tray. The goose was covered with a pink-brown crust. The sweet smell of meat and spices filled the room, and this one was ready. She turned off the stove, then took an unopened bottle of Vermouth from the cupboard and silently handed it to her husband. But that's it, guys. She turned to Benjamin and Michael. Make your own mashed potatoes. You guys gonna split up? Knock us out. She opened the door and went out onto the landing. Christina called her William. What did she turn around for? She forgot to take off her apron. Christina laughed, took off her apron and threw it over her husband's head in the direction of the smirk. All the boys, and caught it on the fly. Christina knocked on the neighbor's door. Michael's mother appeared on the doorstep. A Syrian Cossack, come in, neighbors. She smiled broadly, handing Michael a tray with her signature cake. Benjamin bowed theatrically. Thank you very much for such an appetizing birthday present. May it be yours. I got embarrassed and closed the front door. The guys returned to the apartment. Michael went into the hall and put the cake on the coffee table by the window. Benjamin was in the kitchen draining the water off the potatoes. Go potatoes, he called out to his friend. I'll go and change my clothes. At the whistle of the tray rhythmically melody, Michael smoothly opened the refrigerator, took out milk butter, and plunged into the process of cooking mashed potatoes. When the dish was ready, he tangled the pot tightly in a terry towel, grinned contentedly, and headed for his friend's room. Benjamin had already changed into a dark green Empire, tight blue jeans, and was radiantly removing 2 liter bottles of vague liquid from under the couch. Michael gasped with joy. And I thought I'd have to settle for a crown. How did Granny manage to show solidarity? Benjamin held out the bottle to Michael. Yes, she's a worldly old lady. Michael winked at his friend, went into the hall, and put the bottles on the table. The bell rang insistently. Benjamin went to the front door and opened it. From the threshold, the guests gave a friendly shout. Happy birthday. Happy birthday. Thank you. Benjamin playfully bent to roll the whole thing. The noisy crowd could barely fit in the narrow hallway. Michael immediately rushed over to the tall, slender brunette Clara. He helped her take off her windbreaker. He hung it on the rack and sat down carefully, taking off her shoes. From the flawless feet of a classmate, tipped it lightly over her head. Slaga laughed contentedly. Michael became. She grabbed his waist with her hands and lightly touched her lips to his cheek, the young man. Then, closing the embrace, confidently took Michael under her arm, and they walked to the table. Benjamin accepted the clothes of his companions, Sam, Jack, and Sophia, and looking at the filled hanger, he went to the bedroom, folded the jackets on the sofa, and returned to the guests. They were rattling their plates in friendship, pouring themselves cold appetizers. Michael was serving alcohol when the doorbell rang again. Benjamin suddenly shuddered. Oh, it must be my brother, said Clara with feline grace, putting her foot on his leg. Yeah, uninvited, and definitely with some new girl. She cast a sly glance at Benjamin. He was in no hurry to open the door. Michael patted me on the shoulder to open it. Benjamin waved his head negatively and headed for the front door himself. It was indeed Sluod's brother, and he didn't come alone. Alex was holding the hand of a new girl from their class. Happy birthday, Benjamin. He said, happy birthday. You don't mind my company? The boy nodded at Kathy, and she looked a little embarrassed. No. Benjamin smiled confusedly. Come in. Alex quickly took off his denim jacket, threw it on the podium, and rubbing his hands, made his way into the hall. The crowd gave a friendly buzz. Greeting him, Benjamin and Kathy were left alone. You can undress in my room. He guiltily nodded toward the coat rack and strode toward the bedroom. Kathy followed. The room was in semi-darkness, Benjamin held out his hands to help the girl remove her cloak. Kathy stopped him and took a small box out of her pocket. A present. She smiled as she opened it. It was a miniature model of a sailing ship. "Congratulations. I hear you want to join the Navy." Here she held out the model 7 feet under the keel, both at sea and in life. "Thank you." Benjamin smiled, looking at the gift. Kathy took off her cloak and laid it on the back of the couch. She liked it. Did she glance at the birthday boy? Very much. Benjamin set the model on the bookshelf and held out his hand to Kathy. "Let's go to the guests." "Let's go." 12 pairs of eyes in the crosshairs, hand in hand. They appeared in the doorway for a moment. There was silence in the room. Alex flew over to Kathy and pulled her to the table, seating herself next to him. "This is Kathy." He introduced her to the company. "You all know her, though." Benjamin sat down next to Michael and Clara, across from Kathy and Alex. "So," Michael rose from his seat. "Finally, everyone's here. So let's have a toast to my best friend's coming of age." He turned to face Benjamin. "Happy birthday. Happy birthday." The guests cheered. "Happy birthday." In the midst of the fun, Clara danced with Michael over his shoulder, watching Kathy. She didn't like her new acquaintance. Imperfect, sure, but there was something about her. She pondered. The boys are bursting at her. Soon they'll break their eyes. Beautiful thick hair, the color of ripe wheat, slightly frizzy. Clean, not with falling below the shoulders. She's not badly built, but she's clumsy. I'm much more graceful. The dress isn't bad. Straight 1 ton. The khaki color sets off the color of her eyes, the cleavage of her breasts. She's got taste, she's got legs, and they're slim. But my longer and much prettier eyes cannot make out whether gray or gray-green mint or prominent form. Here she is completely resting. Mine are just huge lakes. You could drown, yeah. At the look, what's her look? Caressing. Exciting standing sensuality. Skin, pale as milk. Lips, varied beautiful, medium correct shape. Straight nose. Sharp chin with dimples. Still, she was very attractive. Clara shook her lips. My queen frowned. Michael kissed her ear and whispered, You are the most beautiful. I am far away from you." He nodded towards Kathy. Clara shuddered. She ran her thin fingers through Michael's thick hair and looked into his mesmerizing black eyes. "And you know all about me." She ran her hands up his neck and kissed his lips appreciatively. Alex was looking at Kathy too. Sweet, appetizing, young girl, but too right. Wasted his time with her. He got nervous and went out to the balcony for a smoke. Benjamin, on the other hand, could not help but admire the new acquaintance of her from her burning eyes. An open smile, an infectious laugh. Literally, everything about her seemed warm and native to him. He stood up and asked Kathy to dance. But the tune suddenly ended. Michael quickly jumped to the tape recorder, flipped the cassette, and the music spilled into the room languidly, drowning out the human voices. Benjamin put his arms around Kathy. Her nearness made him feel infinitely happy. She pushed back the hair that was falling over her face. Benjamin said a little audibly, "Your hair smells like a spring plow." "Really?" She looked embarrassed. "You don't like it?" "No." He gently touched her lush locks with his hand and liked it very much. Kathy laughed softly, and Joy felt her relax in his arms. The balcony door slammed. Alex entered the room. He froze, and his gaze slid absent-mindedly across the parquet. Then Alex quickly walked past the dancers and sat down at the table. Throughout the evening, he never looked at Kathy again. Clara swayed to the beat of the music, rolling a delicious pink apple in the palm of her hand. She looked at Benjamin and Kathy and smiled contentedly. The feeling between them pleased her. Sure, Benjamin was a good-looking guy, but a little plain, short, strongly built with a charming smile and clear brown eyes. He attracted the attention of the opposite sex. But Michael was truly handsome. She looked in his direction. Tall, slender with perfect facial features. He felt every movement of my soul. There's a smile playing on my favorite face. He gets up from the chair, comes over, touches my neck, gently runs his fingers through my hair. There is no peace next to Michael. Girls are crazy about him, and so am I. I'm in love with his searing black eyes and hair the color of a crow's wing. His humor, his plasticity. I'd tear anyone apart if she wants to take him away from me. On impulse, she wrapped her arms around Michael, pressed herself tightly against him. A small shiver shook her body. Abruptly, she pulled away. She took a big bite of the apple. Droplets of juice appeared on their lips. She looked up at Michael, and in her emerald eyes danced lights, fierce, all-consuming passion. The music ended. Benjamin and Kathy stood in the middle of the room, unable to look away from each other. Then they sat down at the table, and without paying attention to others, enjoyed each other's company for the rest of the evening. By midnight, the guests began to leave. Alex, who had been drinking a lot, came to Kathy and took her hand. "After all, I decided to see you off, baby." He staggered a little. He asked, looking into her eyes. Kathy gently withdrew his hand and waved her head negatively. "No, I'm with Benjamin." When retired, Michael held out his jacket to him. Alex slung it over his shoulder and followed the others out onto the landing. Benjamin helped Kathy put on the coat, and they went downstairs. It smelled of rain and spring freshness outside. Kathy took Benjamin under her arm. "Where do you live?" he asked. "On Lennon." "If we turn into that prologue," Kathy stretched out his arm, "in 10 minutes we will be at my house. Is there an authentic way?" Benjamin winked at the girl. "Normal heroes always take a detour." "There is." Kathy laughed. "There is always another way." Benjamin set his face to the flow of the light Sebastopol flight. He looked at the exciting turquoise eye of the Black Sea, sat down on the sandy shore, took the letter from Kathy out of his trouser pocket and reread it again. The dove of a warring train came to mind, the smell of spring grasses from the developing golden hair, the girl he loved, the clatter of the wheels, and the soulful July night were pervaded with anger. A little over a year has passed since that moment. Benjamin was in the Navy. Kathy and Michael were studying law at the Finnish State University. Both were sure to keep him at least briefly informed about each other's lives. Kathy wrote about successfully passing the first session. She was in the same group as Michael. Benjamin looked at the skyline. His imagination pictured tired and hungry students walking out of the doors of a familiar university. Outside, they are exchanging impressions, joys, and failures. All the girls look back in the direction of the handsome black-haired guy next to whom Kathy is walking. She is in her open gray dress. Her shoulders have managed to absorb a light Finnish tan. With a graceful movement of her head, she tries to push back her hair. Benjamin sank deeper and deeper into his sweet reverie. He remembered their first kiss, the gentle embrace, and the feeling of warmth under the fabric of that gray dress. There were still 2 whole years ahead of them, and they seemed like an eternity. 6 months of boot camp dancing behind them, a Navy mop made from the plastline of your new end, constant hunger, trips to harvest grapes. Now, more and more often, the cruiser on which Benjamin served went out on patrol in the Kerch Strait area, and free time was almost no. But he did not leave his hobby, studied literature, dishes, construction, collected magazine articles on repair and construction of small ships. Often considering Kathy's gift, he clearly visualized the vessel in its actual proportions, taking shelter under the shade of the trees. Clara watched Michael and Kathy. Holding hands, they crossed the road. "Bastard. What a bastard," whispered Clara. "I hate you so much. Michael had the misfortune to be in the same class with you. He's looking after a friend's girlfriend." "What? I'm not giving him to you. He's mine." She abruptly left her seat and headed for the post office. Benjamin was very surprised when he received a letter from Clara. He started to read it, and the text swam before his eyes. With trembling hands, Benjamin tore the hated theater sheet into small pieces and threw them on the barracks floor. All night he spent without sleep, and in the morning he went to sea. On the cruiser, sailors were vigorously discussing the agreement between Russia and Ukraine on the division of the Black Sea Fleet. "Stop talking. Line up," commanded the petty officer. He looked at Benjamin with surprise. "You look exhausted. They got Jack Lawman, haven't they?" He gave a strained smile, but he couldn't stand it any longer, waved his hand and swore. "It's not a service, it's chaos. It's just the nucleus, Mother. The fleet is divided." Benjamin suddenly realized with horror that the fate of the Black Sea Fleet is finally decided, and the city became even colder. The heart lived with pain and emptiness. There was a noise of engines. The cruiser was gaining momentum. The streets of Enrico View were alive. Michael walked into the entryway of a 5-story building. As he walked, he brushed snow off his coat. He ran up to the 4th floor and rang Kathy's apartment bell. She opened the door. "Urka." Michael impulsively hugged her. "I invited Benjamin to the wedding." "Yeah. And what did he say?" There was a flicker of hope in her eyes. "He hasn't written to me at all." "Nothing." Michael rubbed his frozen hands together. "I'm just waiting. He's got to react to his best friend's dark ties." "That would be nice." Kathy smiled weakly. "Christina says he hardly writes at all, which isn't like him." "When is your wedding?" "Clara's in a hurry. We filed the application today, so in exactly 1 month, I'm breaking up my single life." "Do you think Benjamin will be able to make it?" "I don't know, honestly, Michael. I don't know. He hasn't said anything for so long. Probably fell out of love with me and met someone else." "What are you talking about?" "Kathy, nonsense. You see the mess going on over there. I called the unit. They didn't even call him. They said he's not supposed to. He'll write. He'll write." Michael and Clara got married. A year later, they had a son. Kathy took care of her sick father for a long time. But despite her best efforts, he passed away quietly in his bed in the early spring morning. Kathy was left alone with her mother. She waited expectantly. But Benjamin never wrote. Kathy was walking home when a May thunderstorm came noisily into town. She froze in the rain, wiping her tear-wet eyes. Someone covered the girl with their umbrella right up to her. It was Benjamin's mother. "Thank you, Christina, sweetheart." Kathy turned her weeping face toward her. "You're not telling me anything, but Benjamin's about to arrive, isn't he? Oh, what kind of punishment is this?" The woman's face grew sad. "He's not coming. He's going to St. Petersburg. He's going to enter the Military Technical University. So I told you everything. Even though I promised I wouldn't say anything." Christina put an umbrella in the girl's hand and slowly walked away until the raindrops stopped beating against its fabric. Kathy stood in one place. All day, Benjamin was not left with an uneasy feeling of foreboding. He was returning home from class. The cold October wind was driving yellow leaves across the pavement. He appeared and shuddered near the entrance where he rented an apartment. He saw a familiar figure. No, he hadn't. It was her, Kathy. He swiftly approached her, heart from nodding frantically dove. He stopped and looked up at her. She was wearing a light green mush world coat. The wind ruffled her golden hair. "I'm here to see you, Benjamin." Her fingers sawed, clasping the strap of a lady's purse. Benjamin almost didn't hear her blood pounding annoyingly in her temples. "What was between you and Michael?" he asked bluntly, and his heart grew cold waiting for an answer. "What makes you think you can answer the question, Kathy?" "Michael married Sarah. They have a son growing up." Benjamin is a little confused, but that doesn't mean anything. "I don't believe you, Benjamin, Kathy, souls or tears. That's why you haven't written to me. What's the matter with you, Benjamin? You know I love you." I don't know anything." He covered his face with his hands. "Go away, you're hurting me." Kathy awkwardly adjusted the silk handkerchief around her neck, lowered her head, and walked away. Benjamin stared after her for a long time before she disappeared around the next corner. 5 years had passed since Kathy and Benjamin had parted. After the institute, Benjamin returned to Ukraine and got a job at a shipyard. In the city, he sometimes worked part-time repairing boats. He was fond of Yacht King. He rented a room in a house near the sea, installed an Opal in the backyard, and started building his yacht. He was fortunate enough to meet another enthusiast, and the two of them spent 2 years working evenings after work on weekends and vacations to complete their project. The yacht turned out to be successful, with good, seaworthiness. It had small dimensions and simple construction of a spacious foredeck, and the sails were made of lap sleds. The friends registered their vessel and joined a yacht club. They often won not only in their class, but also left larger yachts behind on many occasions. Regular orders from private individuals allowed Benjamin to accumulate a decent capital, leave the factory, and open a small private firm for the construction, repair, and design of small boats. His business expanded over the years. Subsidiary firms were opened all along the Black Sea coast of Crimea. Benjamin worked on the Gap with a kind of fierceness, solving organizational and management issues. He did not stop designing. He slept 2-3 o'clock hours a day and was never tired. His subordinates could not keep up with his frenetic rhythm of life. They couldn't find a single weakness in the chief. They called him Werther the Robot, an inquisitive, desperately in love boy in worn jeans, and the Watson of the Empire, dissolved in a haze of memories and turned into Mr. White. And nothing could disturb his soul, the soul of a brutally principled entrepreneur, obsessed with the only passion for his business. And only in the cold October evenings, when the wind drove the fallen leaves through the streets, he became irritated at any trifle and committed uncharacteristic acts. And now he felt a future longing, watching the hateful wind play in the yellowed leaves of the trees and listening to its crazy song. He abandoned his car in the yard, walked swiftly into the mansion, and slammed the front door loudly. In the house stood the sound of the impenetrable window, and the wind could not be heard. But in the heart of the man leaning helplessly against the front door, louder and louder conquered the extended October wind. "Why so loud, dear?" A glamorous, long-legged blonde appeared in the hallway. She languidly led the way past him, showing off all the charms of her figure. Benjamin looked at her indifferently and finally stepped away from the door, took off his coat, and handed it to the girl. "Take it to the check room." The girl froze for a moment. "My joy is not in good spirits. I've been promoted to the rank of servant." Benjamin answered nothing. He went up to his study, wrapped up the paintings, and came back to lie down on the leather sofa. In her bedroom, the blonde walked over to the cotton nightstand and Shyla no-sink her martini glass and collapsed on the bed with a crash. "Newsy-poosy, what are we not to a tea?" mumbled she, pulling her cell phone out from under the pink cool pillow. "Hi," she said, shifting to a whisper. "You know, my secretive one went to bed alone again. I'm bored." "No, he has a fall exacerbation of what?" "What mental aggravation?" "I tolerate it, because he promised me a new car. But I'm bored to tears. He doesn't like it when I have fun." "Auntie." The girl twiddled her thumbs. "All right, I'll give it a shot. Meet me at the club. At the moment, I guess. He doesn't give a rat's ass about me." All night, Benjamin was haunted by the same dream. He was running away from the cold wind on a deserted road. A tornado of fall leaves followed him, and he fell into the bile-smelling grass and gasped for breath. He awoke at 5 o'clock in the morning, wiping sparring from his forehead. Then the fears and remnants of the dream made their way to the bathroom, undressed, and stood under the shower. The rushing stream of hot water from above finally freed him from the nightmare. Later, wrapped in a towel, he went down to the kitchen and drank 2 cups of scalding black coffee. Outside the window, a warm, sunny day was dawning. Jumping over a step, Benjamin went up to the second floor and opened the door to the blonde's bedroom. The room had a rainy smell of liquor and expensive perfume. He entered and opened the window. The blonde stirred and opened her eyes with difficulty. "What the master desires," he barely audibly mumbled. "I'm leaving." Benjamin sat down next to the girl on the bed. "Take the money from my desk." Behave yourself. He stroked her tangled hair. I see. The guy frowned. It will be done. Benjamin stood up and headed for the exit. You don't love me at all. He followed. He closed the door silently behind him. Benjamin stared, watching everything around him shrink. The fields of the forest. Everything was taking on a model shape. He leaned back in his chair, remembering his last visit to Minsk. Then he still wanted to know about the fate of his friend and former lover. That was when he had met Clara by chance. She, carefully avoiding his gaze, told about her family life son quite successful career Michael. He had graduated from the bar, and his services were popular in the city. In passing, she mentioned Kathy, and in that instant Benjamin's heart rumbled. She worked for a major travel firm, representing its interests near Remington Resort. Met Justin Foreman, a successful lawyer. Married him, had a son and lives in England. The plane began to descend. This time, Pinsk welcomed Benjamin with warm weather. He drove up to the house of his youth and immediately looked into the outermost windows of the third floor. He quickly climbed the stairs and hesitantly pressed the bell button. The front door bolted open and Christina appeared on the threshold. Her lips quivered. Benjamin. She stepped toward him and pressed herself against her son's chest. Mommy's going to be a flood. Benjamin put his arm around her shoulders and kissed her gray temple. Volodya, why are you lying down? Meet your son. She took Benjamin's hand and pulled him into the apartment. With a radiant face, William appeared in the hallway. He hugged his son. What brings you to our neighborhood? Passing through, he asked. Benjamin waved his head in the negative. No, I just missed you. Why didn't you say so? With trembling hands, Christina offered her hair. I would have cooked something delicious. Well, make it now. William cast an angry look at his wife. And you, son, will you rest from the road? He approached Christina, and they retired to the kitchen. Benjamin took off his coat and shoes and went into his room. Nothing had changed there. As before, on the bookshelf stood his favorite books. An old plush blanket lay on the sofa. Benjamin lay down and instantly fell asleep. He dreamed of the dark, raging waters of the Black Sea. A strong wind tore the sails of his yacht. An oncoming ship emerged from the fog. A woman stood at the stern. She held out her arms to him. A gray, damp haze enveloped her silhouette, and it dissolved into space. Still in the power of sleep, Benjamin opened his eyes and pulled the smell of roasting meat from his nose, bringing him back to reality. In the kitchen glowed Christina. On the table stood a plate of appetizingly beer-battered. What a regal breakfast awaited me. Benjamin stretched sweetly. Lunch. Christina changed to a whisper and hurry up. Because my father has been eyeing the cognac since yesterday. She nodded towards the final. Well, that's fixable. Benjamin went through the baths. Half an hour later, the whole family gathered around the table. Withdrawn after 3 knocked-back shots. William asked his son, I hope you're joining us for a long time. 3 days at your complete disposal, answered Benjamin. We've been working on the clogs. It was delicious. A big smile spread across Christina's face. What are your plans for today? What plans? There is a proposal in advance to agree to everything. Benjamin spent the whole day near his parents. They drove to the cemetery in quiet sadness, stood by a dear grave, went into the little chapel next door in meridian of church candles. Benjamin remembered his grandmother. Her affectionate gaze and pie-smelling lines wrinkled. Then they wandered around the evening city for a long time, had dinner in a small cafe, and returned home. Benjamin was paying off the cab driver when a cell phone appeared in his coat pocket. He beckoned to his parents to come up and started the conversation. The manager of the yacht club was calling, with details of the past regatta. Benjamin listened to the occasionally over-lively emotional subordinate, while his thoughts swirled to one thing. Everything. Then Alex, everything, then he said, and passed out. The bright light of car headlights for a moment blinded him. Near the entrance, a cab slowed down, from which a tall, black-haired man got out. He walked quickly past Benjamin, but suddenly stopped and turned to face him. "Hello, Benjamin." "Hello, Michael," replied Benjamin, clutching the cell phone in the palm of his hand. "Are you visiting?" asked Michael. "Yes," Benjamin said. "Not for a while." "I see." Michael hesitated and, looking at the toes of his shoes, said quickly, "Kathy is here visiting her mother and her son." "I don't care about that." Michael grinned. "Yes. You haven't cared about us for a long time." He waved his hand and walked quickly up the stairs. He couldn't move. Benjamin stood in one place for a long time, but the footsteps of his former friend echoed in his head. He shook off the obsession and entered the entrance. Christina immediately noticed the change in her son's mood. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing." And Benjamin smiled strained. He undressed, went into the hall, and sat down in a chair. William looked away from the TV screen and looked at his son carefully. "What's sour?" he began. William scratched the back of his head thoughtfully. "Organize us a shot and a couple of sandwiches." He cleared the coffee table of newspapers. Christina brought a bottle of vodka, 2 shots, a plate of sandwiches, and quietly left. Benjamin drank with pleasure and, through the fog of his thoughts, maintained a conversation with his father. He, in his turn, was not overly curious and told about his mutual acquaintances and fishing trips. Benjamin relaxed and felt the strain of tonight forced upon him. He laughed at his father's jokes, shared his impressions of the changes in Minsk, and almost completely forgot about his meeting with Michael. In her room, Christina lifted her head from the pillow, listened to Benjamin's voice, and smiled happily. She liked to fall asleep feeling her son's presence beside her. In the middle of the night, Benjamin woke up with a heavy heart. An inexplicable excitement swept over him. He got up, dressed, and went outside. Benjamin almost ran down the familiar streets, the cold wind whipping him in the face. Dawn ran behind the three, gazing up into the sky, ravaged frontiersman. He stopped, lowered his head, and stared, sightless, at the door of a familiar entryway. She was creating. His heart beat frantically against his ribs. Kathy stepped out of the entryway. Joy struggled to suppress the urge to run toward her. They stared at each other for a long time. Kathy's eyes filled with tears. She shook her head negatively, turned around, and disappeared into the entryway. Benjamin looked on confused, slammed the door shut, then slowly made his way back the way he had come. His mind drowned in an abyss of despair. It turned out that his endless struggle with his love was even. He was completely unaware of his actions. What was this strange feeling? Had torn him from his warm bed and forced him to come here this early, straight, angry morning. After all, he'd been chasing away the ghost of his first love for years. He'd been diligent in smothering it, his release from the pain. Over the years, the pain had gone, but the love had still lodged in his heart with a sharp rubber band that sometimes nudged, and his soul walked with loneliness. He walked and swore himself for the past, Kathy for the present. But why? Why had she left? He was ready to forgive her everything, all his suffering. Just to hold her, to feel her breath, to smell her hair, to touch her cheek with his lips. Gasping, Kathy ran into the apartment and immediately rushed to the window. She looked at the departing Benjamin and averagely slid along the wall. He was leaving, and now for good. How painful was it to let him go? It felt like her soul was bursting at the seams. But why had he come? Can time be turned back? I can't be with him anymore. I can't. But then why was he so obsessed with his jealousy? So sure he was right. Why didn't he look into it and just go along with his feelings? How much does it hurt? God, it hurts so much to let go of someone you love. Mom, what's wrong? Why are you crying? Alan, Kathy's 12-year-old son, walked into the room. She held out her arms to him. Come here, my darling. Holland came over and cradled her head against his chest. Kathy kissed his warm hands and cried softly. Holland stroked her head. Mommy, let's go home. You're always sick here. I'm scared. You're right. Kathy stood up, wiped her wet face, and put her arm around her son's shoulders. Let's go pack. An hour later, Kathy looked up at the street. Her mother waved her hand through the carriage windows behind the rain drum. Kathy peered into the compartment. Ellen was sleeping peacefully. She walked quickly into the empty vestibule and let the tears flow. The train was rapidly gaining momentum. At the same time, looking at his native Pinsk disappearing under the wing of the airplane, Benjamin took out a model of a sailing ship from the inner pocket of his coat and looked at it for a long time. The stewardess brought the cognac he had ordered. Benjamin thanked her and held out the souvenir in the palm of his hand. "Take this for you." With one lip, he said. The girl smiled and accepted the gift, and the city returned to the porthole. The rain intensified. He drank the cognac and dialed the girl's number. She picked up. "Benjamin, are you crazy? Why don't you answer the phone? I've been getting calls from your employees. When will you be here? I'm already on a plane." "I'm sorry, but it's better if you pack your things and leave." That girl's voice turned into a scream. "What kind of asshole are you? You found a toy. Come and go, damn you. I'm sorry, but go away." Benjamin hung up. It was also raining in Sevastopol, and Benjamin entered the empty house. It was in unimaginable chaos. The curtains had been torn from the windows. Things scattered underfoot, shards of broken crockery crunching. He went up to his office, took the car keys, and went down to the garage. Benjamin arrived in Nikolaev in the late afternoon, summoned the farm manager and workers. He drove in, opened the car door, and immediately gave the order: "Put Kathy on the water." Benjamin, the manager, was confused with his eyes. She hadn't been tested yet, and there was a storm warning. "Get down." Benjamin got out of the car. The boat was lowered. As Benjamin stepped out into the open sea, darkness shrouded the boat on all sides. The rain was pouring down on the deck. The wind tore the sails. Suddenly, by midnight, the sea calmed. The fog cleared and revealed a starry sky. Benjamin stretched out on the wet deck, spread his arms, and closed his eyes. He listened to the silence of the night and dreamed, for things could have been different. Like this. In the middle of the night, Benjamin awoke with a heavy heart. An inexplicable excitement swept over him. He got up, got dressed, and went outside. Benjamin almost ran through the familiar streets. The cold wind sheeted his face. Dawn came running in. Staring up into the sky, insights played out. He himself stopped, lowered his head, and stared, sightless, at the door of a familiar entryway. She was creating. His heart beat frantically against his ribs. He took a step forward. Kathy stepped out of the entryway. She moved toward him. The distance between them was rapidly shrinking. Benjamin hugged her nostrils behind her cheek. It came the scent of meadow grasses, pressed her hands to his chest, and nestled against her lips. The years dissolved. The distance dissolved. Everything that separated them dissolved. Then Benjamin woke up in the inn. The sun was already at its zenith. He raised himself on the bed. His heart beat alarmingly. Kathy wasn't around. He heard the sound of water coming from the bathroom, laughed, and buried his face in the pillow, storing the scent of the woman he loved. He closed his eyes. Their closeness was overwhelming. Passion, tenderness, sadness. Everything mixed and exploded in a sensual cocktail of love. How good, easy and joyful, squeezing the stone shell in his chest, cracked there inside something throbbing in his ear. The rubble crumbles to dust. Now it's full force. It's a hot human heart. My heart. A heart saved by love. Wrapped in a towel, Kathy stepped out of the shower. Benjamin melted and walked over to her, unwrapped the towel, pressed his whole body against her, and whispered, "I invite this departing goddess to repeat the water procedures with me as a mere mortal." "I agree." Kathy played along. Benjamin scooped her into his arms. She took his neck with her hands. They looked into each other's eyes and felt happy, tired and very hungry. They went outside in the late afternoon. On their way, they came across a small cafe located in a semi-basement. It was quiet and cozy inside. They sat down at a table in a corner and placed their order. The waiter brought cognac, wine, and salads. Benjamin filled glasses. Kathy bought some of her own and took the salad with gusto. Benjamin looked at her and smiled slightly. Hungry Kathy raised her head as if she hadn't eaten anything for a week. Eat, eat. Benjamin moved his plate toward him. You need to regain your strength. You're going to need it. Kathy put aside her fork and said without raising her eyes, I need to get home. My mom's probably already put out a BOLO. Benjamin furrowed his brow and nodded. Yes, I understand. He reached across the table and squeezed her cold fingers tightly. I don't want to part with you. Are you going to Minsk for a long time? Kathy changed the subject of conversation. Everything depends on you. I certainly deserve a long vacation. Oh, Kathy's embarrassed. I didn't even ask how you were doing. Without details, I can't complain. Benjamin soaped himself. You won't be interested in details. Kathy, you both took your fingers out of his palm and took my purse. Needed to turn on her cell phone. She opened it and took out her cell phone, staring at the display confusedly. Quietly, she asked, Married? Wasn't. Not married, laughed Benjamin. What so? Kathy turned on her phone and put it in her purse. Been waiting for you. He took a deep breath. You're lying. Kathy committed the wine glass. Did you hate me? She looked him in the eye. Yes, I did. Benjamin nodded. And I was very angry that I couldn't stop loving you. That's how I confessed everything. Now it's your turn. Tell me about yourself. He's nothing remarkable. Kathy waved her hand. Being a homemaker, my diploma is considered a piece of paper in the land of misty Albion. What does your husband do? Stern represents the case in the courts. Do you love him? The hot food arrived, and they both fell silent. The waiter left the dish and walked away. Benjamin tapped the table impatiently with his fork. Kathy grabbed his wrist. Eat. You won't touch the food. Oh, yes. Benjamin refilled the glasses. He put the fork in his left hand, took the knife, and cut it into small pieces. For a few minutes, they ate in silence. Benjamin put a white napkin to his lips and nervously held it in his hand. You didn't answer my question. Kathy put down her plate and took a sip of wine. No, she exhaled. But he's a good man. Let's not talk about it. At least I have to go now. Benjamin nodded. He waved to the waiter and paid the bill. They left the cafe in a cold fall downpour. Benjamin caught an available cab and opened the back door of the car, covering Kathy with the edge of his coat. He flew to her lips. Call me when you get there. He slipped his business card into her hand. I will. Kathy got into the back seat. Benjamin slowed down a little and slammed the door behind her. The car moved off. Soon the light from its taillights dissolved into darkness. Benjamin stirred in his sleep, opened his eyes, and looked at his wife, sleeping next to him. The woman's hair fluttered across the pillow. He slid his lips over her naked shoulder and got out of bed. Carelessly threw on a robe, went down to the bathtub. After showering with wet mussed hair, he made his way to the kitchen. Brewed coffee with a steaming cup in hand, he walked to the window and opened it. In a MIG, the room was filled with our smells of spring. He took a sip of coffee, set the cup on the windowsill, and walked back into the bedroom. Kathy lay on her side, putting a hand under her head, and the thin rays of sunlight, reaching through the dense mountain, slid down her body. A whiff of icy wind brought the dreamer to his senses. The play of imagination was over. Benjamin sat up and fixed his gaze on the endless blue surface of the sea and the frowning sky, which was once again covered by heavy clouds. This was his life, joyless and empty with an unhealing heart wound. It could have gone on like this forever if not for one amazing event. It was a cool May night when an angel showed up at Benjamin White's apartment. Benjamin, formerly a successful businessman and now a drunkard, was wheezing loudly in his sleep. He had left his shipbuilding business to a trustee, and after the death of his parents in a dark drunkenness, he did not want to hear about returning to the former life and diligently portrayed himself as an ordinary citizen. Angel walked over to the bed, examining him up to his neck from the good physique. He sighed bitterly, and at that moment a light, barely respectful breeze blew through the apartment. Benjamin rolled over on his side and pulled an old tattered blanket over his head. Angel touched him and in a moment was inside his body. He rose up on the bed and opened his eyes. The solution of the internet networks began to resolve. The roar of cars, the thunder of endless music, cacophony of earthy sounds offensive to English hearing rushed into his consciousness. He took a deep breath, felt the heavy particles of lead and zinc sink into the bronze along with the air, smelling the native odors of exhaust, his wife. Plastics decomposing and garbage made him dizzy and nauseous. He lifted Benjamin's body off the bed and tried to take a few steps around the room. The body was very heavy. In addition, everything inside him was groaning and aching. Angel regarded Benjamin's weakened arms and legs with amazement. He turned to the lonely mirror standing in the middle of the room and shuddered when he saw his reflection. Staring back at him was a bewildered, utterly powerless man of the earth with a flushed complexion and droopy eyes. "Jesus," he shouted out, pointing a shaking hand at the reflection in the mirror, "and I'm his guardian angel. This is a nightmare. They are the crown of the earth's creation. God, can they really be equal to us angels?" He asked in forbidding language, and immediately ashamed, remembering that it was because of this question and ended up in this harmful body. But it is unbearable, these physical sensations, this cloudy consciousness. It's impossible to live in this world. You were such a beautiful land. When I looked at you from above, Angel covered his face with his hands and cried quietly. As if agreeing with his sadness, the sky cried with him through the window insistently behind the drum of rain. Angel opened it joyfully, exposing his face to the cool and fresh wind and gathering the raindrops in his palms. The rain stopped suddenly. Angel sank down on the windowsill and with an inner gaze, immersed himself in Benjamin's body. The angelic powers left to him were negligible, and yet it transformed him, cleansed him of toxins, strengthened his blood vessels, and increased his circulation. "That's better." Angel exhaled. He looked around and walked over to the clothes closet. He opened it and picked out a decent suit. He threw off his worn sports tights and left shirt, took a shower, shaved his hair, and changed his clothes. Then he walked over to the dust-covered mirror, looked in it, and was pleased with what he saw. The reflection showed him a blush, a man with bright brown eyes, a stubborn, finely coarse mouth, and a strong-willed chin. He headed confidently for the front door, stepped out onto the landing, locked the door with the key, put it in his jacket pocket, and walked swiftly downstairs. After the rain, the air smelled of lawn and blooming lilacs. The streets glowed with colorful new lights. In spite of the deep night, the city's drinking establishments were bustling with revelry. And these people neglect even sleep to sin more. Angel marveled as he passed two drunken teenagers, arguing about the merits of their cars. Angel felt the anger boiling up inside each of them. He knew that in a few minutes a seemingly innocent altercation would escalate into a massive street brawl, injuring not only the disputants and their cars, but innocent bystanders as well. He turned down a dark, unlit alley, and with his fine angelic hearing, he heard in the distance a child's tearful crying. He ran quickly toward it. Soon he saw a small brick building. Next to it, leaning against the wall, sat a girl. The angel wanted to approach her, but suddenly stopped. A woman came out. "Sonia, little girl, what happened? Why did you run outside? It's so dark. And how did you manage to open the door?" The woman sat down next to the girl, hugged her, and pressed her to herself. "Well, tell me what happened." Lisa had chocolate waffles for her afternoon snack. I hid them to give them to Vanya in the canteen tomorrow. He's my little brother. He likes sweets better because he's little. The girl buried her face in her knees and sobbed even harder. Zhukova Anka took them away from me, and she said that if I told anyone or cried, she would make me dark. So I came out here at night so she wouldn't hear. The girl finishes with tears running down her cheeks. I want to cry. It's a shame, isn't it? Baby, you're my golden girl. Come to my place. I'll give you tea and chocolate waffles. We're supposed to be submariners too. And luckily, I didn't eat them. We'll put Vanichkas aside. I'll distribute them in the morning. Adam's in the kitchen, and she'll give them to him personally from you. And from now on, let's make a deal. You'll keep all your sweets for your brother at my place, and we'll be safe, okay? Oh, Lisa, thank you so much. You're my visitor, too. Not childishly serious, thanked Sonia, standing up in nightgown from Prilepin and grass. Angel came out of the shade of the trees and sat down on a bench near the orphanage building. He could feel the breathing of the orphaned children in their sleep, saw how the girl Sonia raised waffles, and from the bread howled hot flavored tea from a glass. After a while, the woman and the child climbed the stairs. The angel heard the rustle of bedclothes and finally saw with his inner gaze as the sleepyhead fell asleep, smiling happily in her sleep. Quite imperceptibly, the first rays of the rising sun appeared in the sky. Its light cast reflections on the green trees. The city was waking up, and Lisa offered earnest prayers for her pupils, and went curbed by a passion for wine, to drink her neighbor Benjamin. At 6:30 in the morning, she left the building, easily slung the strap of a lady's purse over her shoulder, and suddenly she stood frozen in place in surprise under the mighty old poplar trees. Benjamin was sitting on a bench, slightly askew from old age. "Benjamin, what are you doing here?" "I'm taking a walk in the fresh air," Angel answered, somewhat embarrassed. He moved slightly. "Would you like to sit next to me? Look how beautiful it is. You don't often see such things." He pointed to the huge pale moon disk that was receding over the horizon. Lisa slowly walked over to him and sat down. For a few minutes she admired the moonset. Then the angel turned to her and gazed at her with some unusual tenderness for a long time. "What a marvelous creature. Do moment these golden curls, Sasha, very much go to her green eyes and cheerful freckles. Probably everything in her image is aesthetically flawless." Lisa was embarrassed and looked away. "You're a strange one today, Benjamin. The way you talk to me. You're looking at me as if you're looking at me for the first time. It's really the first time I'm admiring your beauty." Lisa laughed. "No one has ever said that to me before. No one thinks I'm beautiful. On the contrary, more like a dunce, a stupid woman." The angel gently stroked the picture of the hand. "You are beautiful, because your heart is rich in goodness and love." "Really?" Kitten's eyes involuntarily filled with tears. "Is that the main thing?" "That's exactly what it is. Somewhere I heard a poet say, 'What is beauty? It's a vessel in which there's emptiness, or a flickering fire in a vessel.'" The angel suddenly perked up. "Oh, I'm sorry, Lisa. I think I have to go." He stood up and walked quickly away. Zabolotski wrote it. Lisa whispered through her tears, staring at the rapidly receding figure of Benjamin. Benjamin turned away. In his dream, he was following a young man in white robes through a cynical field. A hot wind was blowing. Benjamin caught up with the wanderer, reached out to touch his fragile shoulder, and woke up. He sat up on the bed, listening to the sensations in his body. Strangely, the usual dopey headaches were absent. Benjamin opened his eyes, per usual, searching the room for the started bottle of vodka. There must be some left over from yesterday, he thought, much to his surprise that the urge for a hangover was not there. He came to the kitchen, opened the cupboard, and saw in a glass covered with a capron lid the unbeaten vodka. Benjamin brought the glass to the potatoes, and suddenly, with a sharp movement, poured its contents into the sink. Putin could not, and would not. He made his way to the bathroom, and stared at himself in amazement in the mirror. "It seems that overnight I have become 5 years younger," he thought, stroking his smooth-shaven face and looking at his reflection. "And why am I in a suit? Where did I squeeze in yesterday? Go down to the courtyard. Maybe someone saw me. Benjamin easily ran down the stairs and out into the courtyard. As usual, out-of-work men were sitting at a big wooden table, playing cards. "Benjamin, you're early today," said the girl who lives next door in the house across the street. "Sit down, you'll have a beer." Benjamin sat down on the glass with beer, resolutely pushed it away from him. The game stopped for a moment, and 8 pairs of eyes stared at him suspiciously. "Ties or something?" the man asked sympathetically. "I had too much to drink last night." "I don't know," Benjamin admitted sincerely. "I thought you'd tell me. Maybe you saw me yesterday. Where did I go?" "Not Benjamin. I didn't go out." "You answered that one. We were up till 10 o'clock at the point. Didn't see you. So unless you went out at night." "All right, thanks." Benjamin's up. "Come on in just as we're getting into it." Invited him in. The men rolled up the driveway in a friendly and loose manner. Benjamin bumped into Miranda, an old-age pensioner who lives in the apartment above Benjamin. "Miranda won't give a tip." The old lady interrupted him. "That's not what I meant. Why do you always ask? Is there a break today?" "For how long?" Miranda asked wryly. Benjamin started, waved at the woman, and entered the entryway. He was going up quickly when he saw his neighbor on the landing. Lisa was scrubbing the floors in the entryway. She deftly clutched a branch rag and left her image. "Hi," saying hello. "You're already hard at work. At least you got some rest tonight." "It's my entryway duty." "Where are you going?" "I slept a little." "What about you?" "I just got back." Lisa stared at Benjamin. Benjamin sat on the windowsill. "So you saw me going out last night?" "No, I didn't. I was on duty." "I saw you in the morning." Lisa wanted to tell him about their conversation at dawn, but something stopped her. "What morning?" "Yes, that's right." Lisa lowered her eyes. "I just thought you were out this morning." "What a miracle. I must have gotten there, but I don't remember how I spent the evening." "Maybe you wandered off into the night too." "I don't remember anything." Lisa looked regretfully at Benjamin in her ear, wiped the floor on the platform, and cautiously said, "Do you want to come to my place? I'll feed you breakfast." "You mean you want some more, how?" Benjamin felt that his appetite had been whetted. "A kind soul always feeds me. At least I used to say thank you when I was drunk." Lisa smiled. "Oh, Lisa, I can imagine what you thought of me." "Okay, you go upstairs, and I'll run to the bucket." Benjamin jumped up from the windowsill, easily picked up the bucket and went down to the yard. Lisa went up to her apartment, washed her hands and put the kettle on the stove. When Benjamin returned, he found Lisa in the hallway. She had already taken off her work robe and was tiredly pulling her handkerchief from her head. Benjamin put the empty bucket in the corner and turned to Lisa. And in a new way, as if seeing his so familiar acquaintance for the first time, Lisa stood opposite him and smiled at him very openly and gently. A strict white blouse emphasized the poverty of her skin. Her golden curls were loose on her shoulders. Benjamin was surprised that he had never noticed this femininity and beauty in Lisa before and felt awkward because he could not take his eyes off her. "Benjamin, why are you standing there like a stumbling block? Come into the kitchen." He shuddered, woke up from his reverie, went into the kitchen, and sat down at the table. Lisa carefully set the table, poured Benjamin some tea, made sandwiches, and sat down across from him. "What's up?" "Well, I'm sorry, we're happy with what we have." She waved her hands in the air. "Uh-huh." Benjamin began to eat hurriedly, glancing furtively at Lisa. "Lisa, why don't you have anyone?" "Well, I mean men." Lisa looked sternly at Benjamin, got up from her chair, and went to the window. "An indiscreet question, Benjamin. Why don't you have anyone?" "Well, it's not fair to answer a question with a question." "And then I've had women." Benjamin suddenly realized that the image of Kathy did not evoke in him today the usual pain and longing. The bright memory of the woman he loved flashed and vanished in an instant. Dana Lisa shook her head. "One for each night. Is that what you're like?" Benjamin laughed, criticizing. Lately he had indeed been bringing home different women, and invariably parting with them in the morning. Lisa was embarrassed and turned away with her face to the window. Yes, I know it's not sugar, and how can you love someone being in a drunken stupor all the time? That's what you're saying, Lisa. Benjamin sighed heavily, got up and approached Lisa. She turned around. Looking into her brilliant green eyes, he continued, "You may not believe me, but I got up this morning and thought I'd start my day as usual, hungover. But I couldn't. How was it cut off? That pernicious urge disappeared. Why, I don't know. But it feels like forever. Except I don't have anything to do. I'm like a caged animal. I've got a lot of energy, but nowhere to put it. I don't have anywhere to put it. Tell me I didn't ask you to go to our boarding school. We need a gym teacher. We renovated the swimming pool, introduced swimming lessons, but there's no one to teach them. Can you teach kids to swim? Do you think they'll hire me with my dubious background and no special education? You bet they will." Lisa ran out into the bedroom and returned a minute later, clutching a stack of newspaper clippings in her hand. "Here, look at the pages of your biography." Lisa held out the clippings to him. The content was similar. Benjamin Lawman won first place in the regional competition. Benjamin Lawman took part in regional competitions and so on. This is a rarity. It was a long time ago. Benjamin tossed the clippings carelessly on the kitchen table, and now I have a different kind of fame. "So what are you doing now?" Lisa asked quietly, but she was willing to try. Benjamin looked at her, marveling at her persistence and concern. "Thank you for what?" "For believing in me. I'll give it a try. I'll come back tomorrow." He walked briskly to the front door. "Do you know what papers to get?" Lisa shouted after him. "I'll see you tomorrow." Benjamin slammed the door. He entered his dusty and long unsure apartment, quickly changed his clothes and started cleaning. Spent until 5 p.m., then had a quick snack and fell asleep instantly. Angel changed back into his Benjamin parade suit. It was still light when he went out into the courtyard. He strolled leisurely through the streets for several hours until he stopped in front of the window of a warranty store. In its reflection, he saw a young girl approaching. She approached the window and began to scrutinize the umbrellas displayed in it. From the girl's thoughts, the angel realized that she was a student, and just today, she received her first scholarship. With it, she had long dreamed of buying a suitable umbrella. The girl opened her purse, counted the money, and resolutely entered the store. Through the glass window, Angel watched her actions. She quickly chose an umbrella and was about to pay when she came across a colorful school bag. The girl froze in indecision. The thing is that the younger sister of the student had long asked to buy her such a satchel. The family income was small, and the girl went to school with her older sister's old briefcase. Many classmates laughed at her for this. "I'm sorry, please," said the girl, pushes herself away the cherished umbrella. "I changed my mind. Give me that school satchel over there." She held out the money to the sales clerk. "Please," she replied. "It's the same price as the umbrella you chose." "I see." The student clutched the satchel to her chest and, smiling, ran out into the street. Angel followed her. The girl sat down in the streetcar for a while thinking, "I'll buy an umbrella sometime later. After all, it doesn't often rain outside, and Christopher endures ridicule almost every day." Now she would be delighted. It was as if Christopher sensed that her big sister was preparing a pleasant surprise for her. She instantly opened the door as soon as she rang the bell. "Hi, Emily. What are you late?" "Are you? We already had dinner. Here, bought you a present, little controller." Emily replied and pulled out a new satchel from behind her back. "Oh, wow. Oh, my goodness." Christopher shouted enthusiastically, carefully taking the gift from her sister's hands. Dreams come true. She gave Emily a ringing smack on the cheek. Angel stood outside the student's house for a long time yet. He saw Christopher shifted in the satchel textbooks, notebooks, quickly dismantled the bed, lay down and immersed in dreams of tomorrow. She rejoiced as only children can rejoice, broadly and sincerely with faith in the miracle, perceiving life as an endless holiday. At exactly 8:30 in the morning, Benjamin rang the bell at Lisa's apartment. Lisa opened the door, smiled charmingly at him. "Prody, I just need a minute." Lisa walked over to the mirror, trying to gather her hair at the back of her head. But the unruly strands were stubbornly dislodged from under the nook, with an inconceivable amount of curls falling over her face. Today she was wearing a strict gray suit and classic low-heeled shoes. Benjamin involuntarily admired the smooth movement of her arms, the supple, feminine figure. Closing the front door, Lisa turned to Benjamin. "All taken, yes, but with God." "With God," replied Benjamin. And holding hands, they walked quickly down to the courtyard. On the internet, everyday life was going on. Benjamin and Lisa passed the dining room where the children were having breakfast. They went up to the second floor and stopped at the principal's office. "I'm a little worried." Benjamin knocked. "Come in," a low female voice answered. Benjamin entered and closed the door behind him. Lisa sighed and slowly walked to her students' first class. 8:30 classes began. The third lesson was physical education. Lisa had already prepared to read an interesting book to the children instead. When one of the older students looked into the classroom, Lisa asked you to go down to the pool. Without hesitation, Lisa built the children in pairs, and they went down to the first floor. The water in the renovated pools played with sunny peaks. They were greeted by Principal Kathy. "Here is your new teacher." She pointed to Benjamin standing next to her. "Benjamin, please love and welcome. At last you'll have real swimming lessons." She smiled and walked away with dignity. The children made an unbearable noise, jumping around and happily rustling their bags of swimming gear. Lisa began to calm them down and led them to the locker room. After making sure all the kids had changed, she handed out inflatable laps and led them to the pool. Benjamin had already changed and was standing in the water one by one, taking the children in and dropping them in beside him. Before going down to the pool, the girl standing next to Lisa tugged her arm a little. "Lisa, what a great teacher we have now, like a rich man of fairy tales. What have you been reading to us?" "And cute." She awkwardly winked at Lisa with both eyes. "Yes, cute," Lisa whispered, glancing furtively at Benjamin. He lowered the enthusiastic sleepyhead into the water and said, "Thank you for your help. Lisa, have a seat on the bench, and we'll get the lesson started." Lisa sat down on a low bench near the wall and watched mesmerized as Benjamin led the class. The bottom of the pool was sloped, and the deepest part of the pool was fenced off with soft netting. The children spread freely around the perimeter, while Benjamin practiced with each one separately. Other children swam around them on inflatable laps. For the girl, the time flew by unnoticed. She kept a close eye on one of her pupils. Rick Lukov stood knee-deep in the water for the whole lesson without taking off the lap. Benjamin came up to him several times and asked him something. The boy stubbornly turned his head from side to side. When all the kids had gone up to the pool deck and were heading for the locker room, Benjamin approached Lisa and asked to leave Rick for the big break. He promised to bring him to the next class himself. Rick stood in front of Benjamin forcefully, clutching a rubber lap. "You're afraid of the water?" directly asked him Benjamin, very much so. Rick gritted his teeth. Benjamin looked at this skinny, sighing, desperate boy and moved closer to him. "And you can cling to my arm as well as to your inflatable lap." He stretched forward a strong, muscular arm and knelt down next to the boy. Rick awkwardly pulled off the circle and lay down on Benjamin's arm, wrapping his arms tightly around him. Benjamin surrounded Rick around him for several minutes, but how was it not a scary time? "I was scared too, really. I chickened out. And then it got really interesting, and the fear went away." "Let's go deeper." "Yeah." Benjamin went deep into the pool, secured the net, and kept circling the boy. "How are things going with your fear?" he asked, smiling. "Kind of scared," the child replied. "But I'm with you. I'm keeping you safe. I can promise that you will be a good swimmer. Teach you. Go ahead." Rick raised his bright, hopeful eyes to Benjamin. eyes visibly. Later, Benjamin led the boy into the classroom. Lisa had time to notice that both of them had a triumphant look. The bell rang for class. Katyn's day passed in a hectic pace. She took the children to the cafeteria for lunch. She supervised the preparation of homework. After the evening walk and dinner, she took her students to the second floor sleeping quarters. When Lisa went downstairs, it was already dark. She entered her office and saw Benjamin sleeping peacefully on the couch. Trying not to disturb his sleep, the girl silently conjured up the door of the large valuable. She pulled from the shelf a blanket, with which she carefully opened Benjamin. After a little thought, she went up to the children's bedroom and lay down on the vacant bed. Angel squared his shoulders and hurried to the exit of the boarding school building. Kathy was coming down from the second floor. She slowed her step and leveled with him. "Finished, Benjamin. Yes, you've had a hard day. But the kids are so happy. They need movement, activity." Angel nodded silently, and they walked outside together. "I let the driver go today, or I would have taken you." "I apologize," in a frightened tone, said the principal. "Raised, you know, that and can give you me tonight." She said goodbye and walked forward through the poplar alley. Angel waited a little while and followed her. Kathy walked very fast until she stopped in front of a rusty, long, unpainted gate. She made a mess of them. Two guys were walking towards her, pushing a wheelchair ahead of them. "You kept us waiting," said one of them. "You're paying for your wasted time." "I was only 10 minutes late. I paid in advance." "What's your complaint?" she replied. "Here are our claims." Claimed. The other pushed in the direction of Kathy, the wheelchair, delivering herself to her destination. And thereupon the young men withdrew as far as they could. Kathy, she lay down on the wheelchair and rolled it along the street. Pulling into the courtyard of a shabby wooden matrimonial house, she knocked on the door of one of the apartments, and a gray-haired, slightly stooped elderly woman answered it. "Oh, Kathy, you come in, come in." No, Camille, you're the one who's coming out with John." She pointed to the stroller. "Oh, he's asleep already. Let's go wake him up." The two women went into the house. They woke up a light-haired boy of about 17. They carried him under their arms into the yard and put him on the stroller. Camille turned on the porch light. John quickly mastered his new means of transportation, drove out onto the road and rolled forward to whistling bravura tunes. Kathy breathed in the fresh night air. Now Camille John can walk on his own. "Thank you." "Don't worry, Kathy, we'll probably pay in installments. John doesn't have a disability. I can't get him, and I didn't have anything to deliver him on. I wanted to go to the hospital alone beforehand. Yes, I'm afraid to leave him in case something bad comes into my head." "Well, I don't need anything from my pension," Kathy interrupted her. "It's a gift. The main thing is to make his life a little happier." Kathy waved goodbye to John and went home. "Oh, our benefactor is noisy," Camille sighed after her. "God bless her." She crossed herself fervently. It was already the first hour of the night when Kathy got tired, sank down on a bench near her house, and thought for a long time. She thought about her son Robert. For the past 2 years, her relationship with him had not worked out. He tried to do everything against his parents, introduced dubious acquaintances, was rude, drank a lot of alcohol. Under the threat of leaving home, he demanded to buy him a motorcycle. Kathy has long been saving money to fulfill his demands, and thereby at least somehow to establish relations with his son. And this morning, without a drop of regret, she spent the money she had bought to buy a wheelchair for the young man who had been in a serious accident and lost the ability to walk. "What am I going to do with a low one?" she thought. "Mom, are you okay here?" She heard the voice of her son, sitting alone and in the dark. Dennis came out of the shadows and sat down next to her. Kathy remained silent. A mother's heart clenched in anticipation of the usual bards. "Man," Robert said softly, "I'm sorry for everything." "I'm sorry to you." Kathy flinched in surprise, and while she woke up on the bench, Robert stood up. "Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't need no motorcycle. Just, I'm sorry, you'll forgive me." He walked over to his mother and put his arm around her shoulders. Kathy covered her face with her hands and burst into tears. Angel stood nearby and watched the embraced mother and son walk into the entryway. He knew what had caused such a sudden change in the young man. Today, one of Dennis's friend's father had died suddenly. And seeing the grief of his comrades, he realized a lot of things. In the morning, Lisa caught Benjamin walking from the pool shower. He cleverly rubbed his back with a large terry towel. "And Lisa, and I had time for a swim." He gave her a friendly wink when she fell asleep on your couch last night. "Where did you sleep last night, my dear?" "I'm in the bedroom with the girls. My shift's over. Why don't we go home together?" She suggested it. "Wait, I'll be right back." Benjamin went into the locker room and in a few minutes returned dressed in tracksuits, sneakers. He came close to Lisa and, a little embarrassed, said, "It's a day off today. I wanted to invite you to go out of town. It's about 30 minutes by train. I have a house. I inherited it from my parents." Benjamin stared at Lisa, listening to the rumble of the train wheels and looking out the window at the tender spring greenery. Lisa and Benjamin looked at each other occasionally and were silent. Each was thinking about something else. Lisa had been in love with Benjamin since high school. There was a time when the whole town was proud of his athletic accomplishments. Lisa collected all the newspaper magazine articles about his accomplishments. Every day she saw him at school, surrounded by ultra-fashionable high school students, and knew her love was hopeless. The likelihood of Benjamin paying attention to her was zero. And then he fell desperately in love with Kathy. Idolized her, never left her side. But still Lisa thanked Providence for the fact that at least furtively, but can see his smile, hear his laughter. Then he went to the army, and she knew nothing about him for more than 10 years. It was an incredible coincidence that years later Lisa got an apartment from the boarding school in the same building where her idol lived. So much time had passed, and she was not surprised that Benjamin did not recognize her. After all, he had never paid attention to the skinny 7th grader with adoring eyes that looked at him. Life had decreed that his idol had fallen, and he was unrecognizable. But in Lisa's soul there was no contempt or disgust for him. She strove to help Benjamin. Sometimes during long periods of drunkenness, she was the only one of his acquaintances who dared to enter his den. Bring food, take out the trash. If anyone called Benjamin an alcoholic, Lisa's heart clenched pitifully. She prayed for his soul, but he looked at her as if through a wall. And now he sat across from her, so close in the dazzling white, with red stripes tracksuit it suited him so well. He looked at her with an affectionate gaze, and she felt that she liked him very much. His former indifference was replaced by admiration and care for her. To Lisa, it was a real miracle, of which she was a little afraid. Benjamin, for his part, pondered when this pinching, thick as golden honey, love for Lisa had filled his soul. He had never once hugged her or kissed her lips, but he felt very happy in her presence. He could not understand what attracted him to this woman. Lisa sat across from him, wearing plain blue jeans and a simple flapper, then a paper blouse and a small flower. Her unruly curls were once again disheveled from the ponytail, gathered at the back of her head. She wrinkled her nose funny, eyes from the sleeping sunlight, and he felt that in the whole world he had no one more dear to him. More, his heart for years dissolved in the beautiful pictures in his eyes. A small wooden house with sad heating stood on the outskirts of the village. Benjamin opened the wicket gate. "Come in and make yourself at home." Lisa with difficulty made her way into the yard, pushing back the nipples, the necks, the branches of fruit trees with her hands, and approached the dilapidated long well. Benjamin followed her. He drew water from the well, carried an aluminum mug from the house, filled it from a bucket, and held it out to Lisa. "How icy is it?" Lisa was surprised, taking a sip and handing the mug to Benjamin. He took the mug from her hands and suddenly laughed. What a fool I was to invite a woman I liked. It looked all around the slumbering corner. All this Benjamin is correctable. With a flexible female gaze and the proper male strength, Lisa took Benjamin's hand, and they entered the house. All day long they labored joyfully and happily. Benjamin cut down the trees, burned the dry limbs, removed last year's grass on the property, fixed the warped doors, and sunk the bathhouse. Lisa cleaned the house, washed the windows, hung curtains, knitted by Benjamin's mother's own hand. When she finished cutting the lettuce, but Benjamin came back from the bath, greedy, sleeping in a cool well of water. He looked around. What a beauty! It was like a fairy tale house. Only one thing is missing, Lisa said, pointing to a corner. Look, your mom had a shelf here for samples. Benjamin wondered. Lisa, there were images. My grandmother was a believer. My mother took me to church. I remember taking communion in church. How do you remember? I don't know. I was about 3 or 4 years old. You know, the local temple has preserved it and now holds services in it. Benjamin walked over to a heavy wooden chest and opened the lid. He pulled out a few old icons from his day. These are the ones I remember having. He held them out to Lisa. She took a dry, clean rag, carefully lost them, and put them on a corner shelf. Now that was all. Lisa crossed herself in front of the images and turned to Benjamin. I wish I could light a candle or a lamp. You look in the wonder chest. I'll go to the bath. When Lisa returned, she found the door slightly open and looked into the room. Benjamin was putting lighted lamps on a shelf. Lord, forgive me. He covered his face with his hands. How much time in my life have I wasted? He whispered. Lisa came in quietly and began setting the dishes on the table. Let's have dinner. Benjamin, come on. He sent for the table. They talked all night long. Lisa spoke frankly about how she had followed Benjamin's fate. He was silent about his past, sharing only that he had recently gotten rid of his ailment one fine morning, wanting to experience life in its fullness. I burned with a spatula in front of the images. She started matchmaking. They went out of the wicket. In front of them lay a wide green, still field. In the distance, the wind and swayed the tops of trees. A bright pink dawn was dawning. Lisa, Benjamin took his hand. You will marry me. Lisa shook her head negatively. I haven't told you everything. I can't have children at all. Never. That's why my husband left me. Large tears rolled down from the vivid pictures of their classroom. Benjamin changed a little. If you want to, go ahead and let Rick adopt. I like that boy. How about you? He asked. Benjamin. Lisa hugged him impulsively. Which one are you? Lisa happily snuggled into his chest. Which one? Which one are you? And he stroked her thick hair affectionately. Angel slowly argued over waking up with the earth, admiring the dazzling beauty of this planet. Suddenly, his entire being exalted you. Sensing the approach of the Creator, he entered the presence of God, and a silent dialogue took place between them. Your mission is over. And what do you think of people now? There are some among them who are worthy of your favor. Why have you changed your mind? I am the guardian of the ages. I have grown to love them. And what of your ward? He is a great sinner, and yet you left him a piece of your holiness. The angel flew around, unable to explain what he'd done. Why are you embarrassed? I have nothing to reproach myself for. I'm like that myself. You are a joy even now. Angel felt his strength return to him completely. In his inner sight, he saw the blue domes of a small village temple drowned in lush greenery, and Benjamin standing in front of the priest confessing him. Silent but perfect joy completed the whole being of the angel, and he continued his flight, circling in a slow, smooth dance. And at this time, one of the cosmonauts of the Russian orbital station observed an unusual phenomenon. He saw rhythmically shining in the distance of the stellar space stripes of bright white color. Something you asked the partner who arrived to replace him. The star is dancing. He replied absent-mindedly. Partner sailed to the porthole, lightly pushed his colleague in the shoulder, and covering the space panorama with his head. After a few minutes, he turned around and said, There's nothing out there. The haze and the cold. Go get some rest. You're obviously exhausted. 10 minutes later, he looked into his partner's quarters. The astronaut seemed to be fast asleep, but suddenly opened his eyes and, smiling, said, "She was dancing after all." Benjamin had long since awakened and watched the sweet sleep on his arm. "Rick." The boy studied, got out of bed, and rubbed his eyes with his hands. "Dad, I dreamed about angels." "You did? And what did they tell you?" asked Benjamin, rubbing his aching hand. Rick jumped out of bed and shuffled his large homemade folders into the kitchen. He came back with a glass of water and sat down on the couch. "And nothing, they don't have a speech machine." "No what?" Benjamin marveled. "But I understood them," Rick continued. "They were happy about us and said I'd have a baby sister soon." "They misinformed you." The front door shrieked and Lisa, who had returned from duty, walked in. "They're awake." "Yeah," Benjamin answered. "Lisa, our son's been dreaming about angels. They say he's going to have a baby sister." Lisa sat down in the chair and stretched out the rest of her legs. "They told him the truth, didn't they?" A joyful twinkle in his eye. She answered. Benjamin's eyebrows rose in surprise. He got up from the sofa, dressed silently. Then he walked over to his wife, sat down on the windowsill chair, leaned over, and kissed her soft pink lips. Rick also walked over to Lisa and asked thoughtfully, "Will you love me less when she is born?" "Silly, my foot child." Lisa pulled him close to her. "My love is enough for everything." She got up from the chair. "Let's go wash up and have breakfast, since you're up so early." Benjamin looked thoughtfully at Lisa and her son, then went into the bedroom, closed the door behind him, and raised his moist eyes to the iconostasis of the house. His throat constricted with a surge of emotion. He knelt down and whispered softly, "Thank you. Amazing story," said Benjamin Lawman, sneaking a tear from his eye. "This story is worthy of print." He grinned. "Are you a real talent?" "It's plausible enough." "Well, except for the presence of the angel. You have a very fertile imagination. But I think he was present in this story and when we met. You know, more than 10 people walked past you when you were lying there on the sidewalk, and I was the only one who approached you. Yeah, maybe you're right. It wasn't the sudden change of climate and low blood pressure that made me sick. I just fainted. People thought I was some kind of boom, although I was wearing a very expensive suit at the time." Benjamin laughed. "I have to tell you that it was Lisa who initiated the venture when I told her everything, and we talked about my past all night. She thought it was the most important thing to take that step, to ask for forgiveness. And the logical conclusion, in my opinion, was for Kathy to take possession of the yacht. But it only lasted a few hours. She reissued it to you the same day. That's how God directed you to reward me for my rescue the day before. I guess the angels really did guide us. How else do you explain these twists of fate? I absolutely agree with you. Benjamin, if it weren't for your guidance, I would hardly have written such novels. You're a great fortune in my life." Benjamin walked over and took Adriana's hand. Together, they walked to the side of the ship. The quiet turquoise sea stretched out before them. A gentle, warm breeze ruffled their hair. Both were happy and content with life. Benjamin was free of past resentments. An idea for a new novel was born in Adriana's mind.